So for this chapter in ServSafe, we're going to be looking at other types of contaminants. So we looked at biological contaminants in chapter 2. So we'll look at our physical and our chemical contaminants as well as food allergies. So again, this shows you what we're going to go over in this chapter. So really quick review of physical contaminants. We talked about this in the first chapter, but again, reminder, these are things that can get into the food, like metal shavings, wood, fingernails, Band-Aids, jewelry, dirt. This could also be fruit pits or bones or some other naturally occurring thing that ends up in the food items as well. So symptoms can be, from mild to fatal. So it could be, there could be minor injuries or it could be very severe injuries that happen with these physical contaminants. So we really want to do everything we can to minimize the opportunity for them to get in the food. So purchase food from approved reputable suppliers, make sure we're inspecting food, and then making sure, we have good personal hygiene. Sometimes this is why we have rules about fingernails or jewelry and things like that to prevent these physical contaminants from getting in our food supply. So chemical contaminants could be things like cleaners, sanitizers, pesticides, etc. You can see that top picture. That's pretty obvious. Hopefully, don't spray cleaners on food and be really careful when you're cleaning when food is uncovered and out there where it could get in the food. So be really careful with those kind of things. Also, some cleaners, may need to be diluted or may need to be rinsed off or whatever after use. So just make sure you're following directions on that. And I really also want to mention the types of kitchenware and equipment. So like pewter pitchers, copper pots, things like that can get into, leach into the food and cause chemical contaminants. There used to be some kind of the painted pottery and plates that used to have lead-based paint in them. So, we're really wanting to avoid any of those from getting into our food supply. Again, chemical contaminants, the symptoms really vary, but it's normally pretty rapid. A lot of times it's vomiting and diarrhea. Your body's trying to get rid of it. And in this case, normally with a chemical contaminant, we would want to call the emergency number, call poison control, etc. to deal with that. Best thing for prevention for chemical contaminants is to use approved chemicals, make sure they're from approved suppliers, that they're stored away from food and prep and service areas, theoretically separated so it's very obvious what's chemicals and what's food. Don't ever store them above food or food contact surfaces. There have been stories about places, not having their chemicals well labeled and people putting things like like powdered white chemical in a thing of tea instead of sugar. And obviously that's a really big deal. At least I've heard stories of someone consuming that, causing really severe burns and problems. So obviously we want to do all of these things to prevent that from happening. Making sure we're using them the way they're intended, follow the directions like we talked about, doesn't need to be diluted, doesn't need to be wiped off, etc. Only handle food with equipment and utensils. Make sure the labels on the container are readable. You can tell what's in there. So all of those things we have to be careful. Also, just note, and this applies at home too, but there's a lot of local regulatory requirements when it comes to throwing out chemicals. So that's also something you need to be aware of. A lot of times you can't just put them in the regular trash. So this is a newer thing to ServSafe, but they've started to look at deliberate contamination of food and what that looks like. So, any of these groups could potentially deliberately contaminate your food. And I've heard stories of, even in Kansas City, of like former staff coming in and putting something in the food or something like that. So just things to be aware of. So the FDA created this alert tool. So making sure that your products are received from safe, reputable sources. Monitor security of products in the facility. So it's not just sitting out where anyone could get to it. Employees know who is in your facility. Reports, so make sure you have information related to food defense where you can get it. And then threat is how would you respond to any suspicious activity? If you saw someone suspicious back in your operation, what would you do, etc. So this is just their kind of guidelines for making a plan to prevent deliberate contamination of the food supply. And now, lastly, in this chapter, let's talk about food allergens. So, a food allergen is a protein in a food or ingredient which some people are sensitive to. And when enough of that allergen is eaten, an allergic reaction occurs. So, what enough is varies from person to person. Some allergies are severe enough that the person doesn't even have to eat it if they're just exposed to it or it's airborne. They can have that allergic reaction as well. So the symptoms range from nausea, hives, swelling, sometimes like a tongue or lip swelling, itchy throat, vomiting, and it can become very severe. So anaphylaxis is also a severe allergic reaction that can lead to constriction of breathing and ultimately could cause someone's death. So this is why we need to take food allergies very seriously. We have 8 common food allergies that are classified as the big 8. So these are the ones that have to be on all the food labels, clearly identified if a product contains these. So those are milk, soy, eggs, wheat, fish, shellfish, peanuts, and tree nuts. And so, sometimes people have multiple allergies. Sometimes, people, if they have a tree nut allergy, maybe they can't eat walnuts, but maybe they're okay with cashews or different things like that. So it really just depends on the individual. People can also have food allergies and do have food allergies to things that are not these top 8. These are just the top 8 common ones that we look at as the ones we're most concerned about people having, but again, people can have allergies to other things as well. So how do we prevent allergic reactions from a restaurant setting? So when you have service staff, the biggest thing is, my biggest thing for individuals in front of house is to encourage them to always tell the chef or management that this person has an allergy, even if they think there's no way that food has an allergen in it, because things change, products change. Sometimes front of house individuals may not know how things are made. It may seem like obviously that doesn't have in it, but maybe it has an egg wash. So maybe there's soy in the marinade or something like that. So always just really encourage making that contact to the manager and to the chef as well. But hopefully the service staff can be able to describe menu items, help identify allergens and suggest alternative menu items, make sure it's delivered separately, avoiding cross contact, etc. Kitchen staff need to avoid that cross contact, and there's a lot of ways this can happen. Cooking even in the same oil can be a problem. So this is fish and chicken, which could be the problem. It could also be, if someone has a gluten allergy, you're cooking French fries in the same oil that you're cooking fried chicken that's been breaded. So that's one way. Surfaces can have this, so using the same pan or flat top or cutting board or knife or even gloves, your hands that had, let's say you made a grilled cheese on the flat top and now you're cooking chicken and that person was allergic to wheat. So there's just a lot of things that we have to look for. Utensils are big. Changing gloves is important. So there's lots of things to look at to avoid cross contact. We also need to check allergen labels. So you can see that contains wheat on there. It's clearly identifying these foods. And you always have to look at this because there have been times that even I've been surprised by allergens in food. I found tortillas one time that had fish in them. Most people with a fish allergy wouldn't check the tortillas. So just always making sure you are reading the food labels, double checking. There may be some things that people don't know as well. That if you're in the kitchen, you may understand that a roux is butter and flour and that thickens things. But maybe someone else ordering doesn't know that the sauce would potentially have flour in it. And so those are things that kitchen staff needs to really communicate well and help think about, where are hidden sources of allergens, what can we do to prevent them, etc. Cross contact is a big problem, so again, making sure we're checking recipes, wash, rinse, sanitize cookware, utensils, equipment, and you don't have to be able to provide allergen-friendly versions of everything. You just need to have to tell the customer the truth about what you can and can't do. And so if you know that, when you're making all the baked goods, even if one doesn't have flour in it, that there's flour all around and you don't feel like it's gluten-free or like because gluten is a protein in wheat, you just need to be able to say that. So it's not saying everything has to be allergen-free, but do your best to accommodate allergen orders, but also it's really important to know when you need to say, I'm sorry, unfortunately, there's no way to separate that, or there's no way that we can, you know, guarantee that that doesn't have that, flour floating in the air got onto that. So just know what you can and can't do, but making sure, you're changing gloves, using separate fires, separate utensils as much as you can help prevent those allergic reactions. But it is something to take seriously. It's not easy, and we have to watch our just instincts. And one time I was at a pizza restaurant, and they were that actually had gluten-free pizzas too, but they were instead of using like a ladle to rub the sauce on, they were using their hands to rub a garlic oil sauce on, and then touched all the toppings. So again, they had gloves on. That's not necessarily a problem from a food safety standpoint, but in doing that, they spread gluten potentially into all the toppings. So again, they would need to let someone know that, hey, there may be wheat in these toppings. So just kind of keep those things in mind on how important it is to really ensure that no cross contact has happened, or to be honest, if you know that the way something was prepared, there's no way to avoid cross contact. So hopefully that was a quick but good overview of allergies and some of our other contaminants. And let me know if you have any questions.